Yeah. Well, glad you're here this morning. I was with my kids over the last few weeks. We were traveling together, and everywhere we go, for some reason, people would ask them. They would look at both of them, and they would say, "Are you guys twins?" And they just assumed that they were twins. And so I remember when they were born, when we had Oliver right after Jane. They're only about 20 months apart. When we had Oliver, somebody came up to us right afterwards and said, "So you guys only make one kind of baby, huh?" I was like, I think so. Like human? Is that what we're talking about? And I think that's the only kind we've ever made. But yes, like we only make one kind. There's one look that they have. Now, I do wonder about one thing with my kids, and maybe you've already figured this out. Oliver and I were putting together stuff over the weekend in our garage. We were putting together some equipment for him and I to work out on whatever together. And as we're doing that, Oliver kept telling me how tall he was going to be and how he was going to be stronger than me soon and all this stuff, which is probably true. I don't know about the taller part because I don't know if you've noticed the genetics in my family, there's two sides. There's very much two sides in my wife and I's families. When we got married, it was pretty evident. You could tell who stood on which side of the wedding aisle. For instance, my family was a bunch of giants. It was all massive, massive people. I was actually one of the smallest people in my side of the wedding party. Most people were bigger than me. My brother was my best man. He's enormous. He's like, have you ever seen like a baby whale? He's like the size of that baby whale's father. And so he's like big. So he was next to me, and then like down the line, just huge people. And then my wife's side was all hobbits, just all these little, sweet little people, minding their own business, just very small people. Now, I've always worried that I was going to have really maybe tall girls and short boys. Like I was going to have, like this genetic thing was going to happen where suddenly my kids were going to be very short because they would take after Marie's line of things, right? You kind of wonder about these things, like what's going to happen? There's two sides of a family. There's two lineages here. What's going to happen within that? How is this going to work? Today, where we are, there are two lines of one singular family. And they're very different lines, and they take after very different sides of this. What we see when we get into this part, we're going to have to recap just a little bit to kind of understand where we're at, because we're in Genesis 4. We've been walking through this, and hopefully this has been eye-opening for some of us just on what's going on in the story of Genesis. Hopefully this has given you some handles on understanding that this is a weird story, but it's not just telling us facts and figures. It's telling us a deeper story about meaning and about truth and about good and evil and what all of that looks like. Today, the good and evil part gets very separate through these family lines. In fact, in some ways, evil will start to not just mature, but it will start to multiply in massive ways through one of the family lines. See, we see that there's kind of these two different lines. If you pay attention to what happened back in Genesis chapter 3, there is this line where it says this. Remember when Eve decides to take from this tree and says that this isn't enough. What I have right now is not enough. I need to acquire more. And so she goes to this tree. God has given them a full garden of the Garden of Eden, everything they could want. But she goes to a tree and says, I want more than that. And so she takes of this tree. When she does take of the tree, she knows good and evil. She recognizes the good and evil inside of the world. There are now two lines. There's good and evil. And when God shows up, God starts to speak to her, and he gives this curse. He actually says a few different curses inside of this, of what's going to happen. Here's how life's going to look different because of your knowledge of good and evil. And one of the things he says is he speaks, which this is kind of weird if you think about it, he speaks to the serpent, this creature, this beast that was at the door, this beast that brought this in, the animal that created this evil within things. And then he speaks to Eve. And he says this to the two of them. He says, I will put an enmity between you and the woman. Who's he speaking to? Between who and the woman? Between the serpent and the woman, between the beast, this creature who is sin personified, sin incarnate. He's looking at that and saying, I'm going to put this line right here. There's going to be an enmity between you, the serpent, your offspring, and the woman's offspring. Now, that doesn't just mean you're not going to get along with snakes, which is true mostly. I mean, I don't know if many of you do get along with snakes. My daughter wants to, which I don't care for, and we've told her she can get along with snakes once she moves out as much as she wants to. Inside of our house, there will be no snakes. We like things that, just have legs and don't eat you and stuff. Like, that's what we're into in our house. And she loves snakes. We had another one in our garage literally just a couple days ago. We were walking into our garage. There's a snake just sitting right at our doorstep. Like, literally, it felt like this line about sin crouching at your doorstep. It was just right there. And immediately, Marie and I were walking in together. The kids were inside the house already. We were walking in. We see this snake sitting right at our doorstep. We do what any 40-year-olds do. We got our daughter to take care of it. We didn't think, like most parents, should we protect our children from this snake? We were like, how do we get our children closer to the snake and further from us? And so she came out, literally just grabbed it with her hands, walked away with it. She put it in a box for me. It kept trying to come back into the house. She threw it a few different times away from the house. She kept picking it up with her bare hands, which I don't care for. And eventually it bit her. She was happy about it, which again, don't know why that's a thing. And she was very happy about this. It was like a battle wound, and she was telling everybody about it last week. Because this is the sin personified. This isn't this just you're going to anger each other. This isn't just you're not going to get along, the woman and the snake. That's not what this is about. It's not like a friendship that's broken here. There is an enmity between not just you two that you're not going to get along, but between your offspring, there is now a dividing line in how your lineage and your legacy is going to be impacted. It's going to mature and it's going to start to multiply in different lineages from this point forward. There's literally a dividing point here in how the lineages start to dissect themselves. So between you and your offspring and hers, he will crush your head. Now this is speaking future tense. Notice it kind of changes. Her offspring, speaking of Eve's offspring, her offspring is going to crush your head. You're going to lose in the end, but in the meantime, you are going to strike his heel. There's going to be this fight that's going on between her offspring and yours. This enmity has been set up. That's what's going on here, and we start to see that. So as we look at this, just if you want to see it kind of graphically, this is what it looks like. There's going to be two lines. I know it's kind of small, but there's a line of the serpent and a line of the woman. For the rest of really the entire Bible, these two lines start to play a part. These two different lineages start to play a part, one from the line of the serpent and one from the line of the woman. That sin that was at your door, that sin, that serpent staying there, is now going to be two separate parts. And we're going to focus on the first one today for most of the time, unfortunately. We're going to go down the line of the serpent, because that's what the author does here in chapter 4. This is where evil starts to mature and manipulate itself until it multiplies all throughout this entire chapter, where we see this line of a guy named Cain. Remember Cain from last week? Hopefully you remember some of this. I'm going to just walk through this quickly to recap what happened with Cain. Remember, if you were here last week, and hopefully you remember, because I know you never forget a word I say up here. I know you've never forgotten anything I've ever said, and I don't either. So that's the good news. I'm pretty up on all of it too. But remember, in chapter 4, we see this guy named Cain. Remember, at the beginning of chapter 4, it says that Adam made love to his wife Eve, remember? And that's kind of this line, you're going to see it 3 times in this chapter. This line kind of creates new beginnings every time. This is a new start to a line when this happens, to one of those lineages. Adam made love to his wife Eve. She became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. Remember, she said this line, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. Remember, in the better translation of this, in my opinion, it would say it this way, where it would say, that with the help of the Lord, remember it's the word et here, not im. So I have kind of forced the Lord into this. And it says, I have acquired a man, which is a whole weird line. I have acquired someone with Yahweh, right? So I've acquired him. That's why the name Cain is the name Cain. She's acquired him. She's now taken him in. His name means, and you can kind of see it in the word there, by the way. The word acquired there, notice how it's kana. That's what that word is. You can almost hear the name Cain come out of that. Remember, his name is Cain, which means to acquire. Then in a little bit, she has another son named Abel. Remember, Abel is like vapor. He doesn't hold on to things. He lets things be free and loose. He's not one that's going to acquire or try to grab more than he needs. He is one who lets things be. Now, he also is like vapor because, unfortunately, his life is very short. We see in verses 3 here, it says, later she gave birth to a brother named Abel. Now Abel kept the flocks, Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought forth fruits of the soil, an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought forth an offering, fat portions from the firstborn of his flock. And the Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not. Remember, there's like this fight here where he sees something good in what Cain has brought, or what Abel has brought, but not what Cain has brought. There seems to be this argument happening here where because Cain has not brought his best, he has forced God into this, that now Cain, it says, Cain was very angry and his face was downcast. And God from that point chases Cain down. He chases him and he challenges him. Remember, we talked about this last week. He chases him down. In verse 6 it says, "Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you so angry? Why is your face downcast?" Verse 7. This is the famous verse, chapter 4, verse 7, where he says, "If you do what is right," if that's what you do, "if you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door." Remember, it's a personified sin, speaking specifically about probably this serpent. There is a literal version of sin that is waiting for you at the doorstep of where you worship. And when you go there, it desires to have rule over you, but you must rule over it. This is part of the curse, that you have to rule over it. But we see, remember that Cain does not rule over it. In fact, Cain becomes it. Cain becomes the beast that we so feared. He becomes the sin incarnate that the beast already is. He does not overcome it. He does not rule over it. Instead, he lives right into it, and he takes his brother out into a field and just murders his own brother. The blood is shed into the same ground that he was formed from. That same dust that he once was, that he now returns to. And we have gone so quickly from a world of order to a world of disorder. And remember, God shows up to him and he asks him this. He said, if you will choose to rule over it, you will be accepted. But if you do not, there's going to be consequence. And notice that, remember that Cain is silent in this moment. Remember this, he does not speak back to God. And that silence opens the door for many other things. And from there, we start to see that Cain, in verse 13, it says, "Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth. Whoever finds me will kill me." But then the Lord promises him this. And the Lord said to him, "Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. Now remember that line that he puts this on him, that this kind of protection. For some of us, we would use the word hedge of protection, but that's only for us who are crazy and don't use regular English words. But he puts a hedge of protection over him of 7 times over, right? Then the Lord puts this mark on Cain so nobody will do this. So Cain, remember, he goes out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain then makes love to his wife. She becomes pregnant and gives birth to a son named Enoch. Now, I just want you to see, again, from the time we started this to where we are now, we have moved from a world of order to a world of disorder. Do you see that? We've gone from a land of creation where God is creating things to a place of death where Cain is literally killing people. Do you see how fast this has moved? Like, we went from a place of perfection to a place of brokenness very, very quickly. We went from a world of order to a world of disorder very fast. And this evil is multiplying and maturing so fast in this chapter. The next thing that happens, notice this, Cain made love to his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Notice this line. This is a huge one. Then Cain was then building a city, and he named it after his son Enoch. This is a huge change. We have gone a long way. Where we were in a garden, now we're in a city. We've gone from this place of creation to this place of death, this place of creation of God's name, where he is putting his image on things, to a place where Cain is putting his image on things. He's making a city for himself. He names it after his son, which sounds benevolent. I don't even know how the guy has time to do this. To make a city for your son. Yesterday, I spent time building a desk for my son. Like, that was in a box. I just needed to put like 7 screws in place. I was exhausted afterwards. I can't imagine building an entire city for my son. And he has time to do this. He builds a city. Now, it's not just for his son. It is for himself. It is to put his name on something, to put his family name on something, to let people know who is in charge, who is in control. He's building a city in essentially his own image or his family's image. It's happening very, very quickly. He names it after Enoch. Now, I do want to say that Enoch here is not the Enoch that is the most famous Enoch in the Bible. He happens in Genesis chapter 5. We'll get to that. There's a whole different Enoch that is very famous, and we will go into his story in a little bit more depth. We'll get to him in a second. But this is not that Enoch. This is kind of a passing through thing. This Enoch does not last very long. There's really only mention of this Enoch. And it says that He builds this city and names it after him. Now, when St. Augustine was doing his work on his work called the City of God, he used this city as a prototype for what he saw as the city of God. And he said this, accordingly, it is recorded of Cain that he built a city. But Abel, being a sojourner, that vapor, he built none. And he says this is why. For the city of the saints is above. Although here below it begets citizens, like we get to be part of this kingdom of heaven, in whom it sojourns till the time of its reign arrives. And then someday that kingdom of heaven is going to gather together all in the day of the resurrection. Like that's what's going to happen. This city will someday be a visible city, but for now, the city of the kingdom of heaven is not visible, but Cain's city is a visible city on this earth. And it only wants the things of this earth. See, it says that he builds this and names it after Enoch. And then there's this line after it where it says in verse 18, to Enoch was born Irad. And Irad was the father of Mehujael, which aren't you guys glad you didn't have to read today? Denise did a great job on this. Mehujael, and then Mehujael was the father of Methushael. Sorry. And Methushael was the father of Lamech. We have now, I just want you to see what happened in those verses. I know this doesn't sound like important things, but what happened, if you want to do the math on this, is we are actually at the 7th generation from Adam. So if you want to do the math, you want to kind of add this up. Remember that 7 means completion of something. The generations were that we had Adam, then we had Cain, then we had Enoch, then we had Irad, then we had Mehujael, then we had Methushael. I'm never going to get that apparently. And then we had Lamech. What that means in the Jewish culture, we think 7 always means good. That's not necessarily the way it's supposed to be. 7 means completion. Like it's reached its full potential. And here, it's not good that it's reached its full potential. In Lamech, what we will find is that evil has actually met its full potential. Lamech, many people believe that his name, it doesn't have a real meaning. There's no real meaning behind the name Lamech. It's a very difficult name to find in the Hebrew. But if you take it and you twist the letters around a little bit, what you get is the word king. Melech is the word for king. And what people believe is that his name is almost a symbol to us of a disordered king. His name is the same letters as king, it's just not in the right order. And that he is a disordered king. He has taken us from order that God created in Genesis 1, where he is putting things in the right order, and now we are fully disordered. He is a disordered king, creating a disordered kingdom below him. It seems as though that's his goal here. He's the 7th in line, he's complete, and he is creating a disordered king. That evil is now fully matured. That evil is now fully multiplied into what it will be in Lamech. We see that. And so when it says in verse 19, it says Lamech married 2 women. That by itself is put in here by the author because there's no commentary needed. This is not a good thing. I know that sometimes we read the Old Testament, we get this idea that like, well, everybody had multiple wives, must be fine. It's not. It was not. It is not. Still is not. I remember when I was in Dubai, I was speaking in Dubai at this conference, and a guy came in, and in Dubai you're allowed to have 3 wives. You're allowed legally 3 wives. And he came in with all 3 of them. And he sat down next to me, and he looked exhausted. And his wives went on a different way, and he sat next to me, and they weren't staying in the room with us because they weren't honestly allowed to stay in the room with us at this point. So he takes them to go somewhere else. He sits down next to me just exhausted. I looked over at him. I said, "Are those your wives?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, and so I asked him, and at this time, like I was kind of new to the area. Obviously I hadn't been there before. And so I was asking a lot of questions, and I asked him, I said, "So how many wives are you allowed to have?" He said, "I'm allowed to have 3 wives." And I said, and he looked over like where they had been standing and just looked exasperated. And I said, "How many wives do you wish you had?" And he goes, "Honestly?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, 0. Which I'm not standing up for that. I just think the multiple wives is not a good thing. In the New Testament or Old Testament, when you see these things come up and they even reference it back to the Old Testament, these have never been this is not the design. The author here almost makes no mention of it because notice what the author's doing. They're creating a whole passage about all the evil that has just spread into the world through Cain, now through his descendants, now through Lamech. And they just put this in there because they're like, here's another thing the guy's doing. Like, here's just one more proof positive of him doing something wrong. And in the Old Testament, we see this over and over again. This is a bad pattern. In fact, I mean, you see it with David. When David has multiple wives, it is the downfall of David, right? It's his biggest moral failing. We see it with Solomon for sure. In fact, you could make the case that Solomon being a polygamist is actually maybe the number one cause for the downfall of all of Israel. It's because he was so bad as a father and as a king because he could not keep it together. Yes, he was apparently the wisest man ever. I have a hard time with the wisest man who ever lived when you've got 47 wives or whatever. Like, that seems, you're not the wisest man ever. I'm just going to say, you put yourself in a bad spot. Abraham's biggest downfall is when he takes a second wife. This is not the design, and it never was the design. So if you ever get into this conversation, people do ask this, right? Because they're like, well, you condone a Bible that believes in multiple wives. It doesn't. It doesn't condone it. It never says, this is cool, guys. Keep up the good work. It does not condone this. This is actually a violation of God's original order. And in many ways, I believe it's a sign of disordered love in general, a full sign of disordered love. Like, this is when love, all that love should be, starts to lose what it should be, right? Like, if you think about it for a second, I mean, what should have happened is what we see in Genesis 2, verse 20. Remember, it says this, that man gave names to all the livestock, and then it says, for Adam, no suitable helper was found. Remember these words? Kenegdo ezer, remember this? That it's this meaning of matching and opposing, but also aid and help. Remember that Kenegdo ezer, it is not helper as an admin assistant. It's not somebody less than. It is an equal partner in. That's what that word means. Again, if you think that helper, the word ezer, means somebody less than, then you are saying that about God himself. Because the majority of times in the Bible that ezer is used as a helper, it is to reference God himself. So if you think that God is just a nice little helper to you, which maybe we do, that's an issue in and of itself. But also, that's what that same word means here. It's a helper that is equal to and on the same level. That's the way God intended this. But notice what happens in chapter 3. There's the curse. Remember the curse? God comes along and the first thing he says to the woman, before he says the thing we just read a second ago, he says, I will make your pains in childbirth very severe, which I know you're all grateful for that. With painful labor, you will give birth to children. Then notice this, your desire will be for your husband and he will what? Rule over you. That was not the original design. That is a byproduct of the curse. Not the sign of perfection that it should have been. And this is just a whole nother point that I'm just going to make for a second. This is why I believe that in the church, women should hold the same roles as men. I believe in culture, you're right. Men, there's a patriarchy, and it is what it is. Because there's a curse. And this is the beginning of it. But the church is supposed to resemble the kingdom of heaven, that perfection that we saw in the garden, the perfection of the world, not the brokenness of the world. And that's why I believe that there's a reason that Jesus puts women into discipleship positions. He calls them to be followers of him at the same level. And the early church brought women in as the same level as men. This is why I believe that to be true, is in the church, it's different than the world. Now, when you read that in the Bible and you read that women should be quiet and whatever, that's because in the culture that was true, because in the world that was true. But in the church, I believe the church is supposed to act different than the world. I don't know if you do, but we have a different set of governance, a different set of rules. We act differently because we're supposed to be reflecting the perfection of Genesis 1, not living in the brokenness of Genesis 3. So he says this, there's a curse here, and the patriarchy starts, right? You're going to have your husband rule over you. That wasn't the original design. It was an equal partnership. Now it's not. And then it turns from patriarchy to polygamy. Now women are not just less than, they are objects of. Notice what it says in chapter 4 here, but it's pretty clear what it says, where it says Lamech married 2 women. He just takes 2 women because they are his possession at this point. It turns into full-on oppression, because his loves are disordered. He loves something that is good, but he loves it in the wrong order and with the wrong amount. And I'm just going to say, I experienced this yesterday on the 4th of July because I love hot dogs. But there's a limit to how much you should love hot dogs. You know what I'm saying? For your own gut and stuff, like your own well-being. We watched the hot dog eating contest, Nathan's hot dog eating contest. I think it's the greatest sporting event of our generation. I know there's like a World Cup going on. I know there's some other stuff that maybe like is professional sports in America. Nobody cares. Have you watched Joey Chestnut? I mean, have you watched this man? Yeah, I think he's the greatest American hero we have at the moment. And I love watching George Shea, who is the guy who talks about him. George Shea is the announcer who was the president of competitive eating, which I don't know how you get that job. I don't know if you just go through Indeed or whatever to become the president of competitive eating in America. I'd like to at least apply. But George Shea talks about him, and you're watching this thing, and you're like, this is a huge situation. In fact, George Shea maybe overstates it. He does say that competitive eating, this is a literal quote from yesterday, competitive eating was the battleground upon which God and Lucifer waged war for men's souls. That's an actual quote from yesterday. Watching the hot dog eating contest. That's not a joke. That's for real. That's a real quote, which is amazing. I don't know that I think competitive eating was what they waged war over, although you could make the case. When Jesus is starving in the desert and Satan shows up, there is a competition about will he eat bread or not. I mean, it's not totally wrong either. And so this is like how big is it? Because I think you love hot dogs, but you love them too much. You love hot dogs that are in the wrong order. Even competitive eating, you love competitive eating, but it's in the wrong order. This is a little overstated. The place that I do believe that they wage war for men's souls is not in hot dogs or competitive eating, but it is in how much we love certain things. We wage war because we love things and we're desiring things, and we are built to love. That is part of our culture, and part of our DNA. We are built to love things, but it's just loving them in the correct order with the correct amount. This is what St. Augustine talked about so many times where he would write about this. He said, these are thine. They are good. Like many things are good. Hot dogs are good. Things are good. There's good things in your life. And he would use the examples, not of hot dogs, but he would use the example of gold or possessions. Those are good things. Or even family, he said, was a good thing, but it can be put in the wrong order. Or love, what he would call lust, is what that could turn into if it was not put in the wrong order. These are all good things, but put in the wrong order, power, desires, our own wants and our own needs. When those things are out of order suddenly, then all of our loves fall apart. And he wouldn't say that you love the wrong things. It's that you love them in the wrong order. He said, these are thine. They are good because thou art good who didst create them. You created good stuff, God, and they're good because you created them. There is in them nothing of ours unless the sin we commit when we forget the order of things. We forget those orders. And instead of thee, we love that which thou hast made. So instead of loving, as Paul would write, the creator, we love the creation. And that is where the beginning of sin was. Notice what happened with Eve. Was it that she didn't love the creator? No, not necessarily. But what did she love more than the creator? His creation, the fruit itself. We get those things out of order and suddenly it looks totally different. And Lamech does that. I would say that Lamech, here's what we see him do in this last chapter. Here's what he has just done. He has started making a city, building walls, literally putting up walls to build a city around himself. He wants to make a name for himself, and he starts to disorder love. He puts the wrong things in the wrong order, even sometimes the right things in the wrong order. You see those three things start to happen? And if it's okay with you, let me just pause for just a second, because this hits fairly close to home if you think about it. Like, have you ever, let me ask about it like this way, a little bit abstractly first. You ever gone to a church where you could say this was true? Started to build walls. We wanted to make a name for ourselves. We started disordering love because of that. What was most important? We put those things in the wrong order. Anybody ever experienced that one? I mean, it could be true of us. I'm not saying we're immune from this here at Restoration. I'm just saying, ever experienced that one? Let me ask, have you ever come from a family where this could be true? Where you build walls, or even individually you build walls, and then you want to make a name for yourself, and then you ever experience that yourself? And far be it from me to criticize, a country or a nation, but ever lived in a nation where this is true? I know it's supposed to be a weekend where we don't do that, but let's just be honest for a second. You ever lived in a nation where this could be true? And here's the thing, like I don't want to, I do get questions about this, and I just want to kind of put it out there because it is 4th of July weekend, it's 250th anniversary of America, and I'm all for like America. I like America. I don't have any problems with like loving America. I actually think it's pretty great. I've been to other countries. I like this one the most. I'd like to live here. I like the things about it. I mean, even yesterday, again, I ate hot dogs for America. I set off fireworks, which I feel like I paid for a lot of fireworks. I feel like that's a tax that I pay every year, is to go buy fireworks, even if I don't necessarily want all of them, because you have to do that to be an American and show everybody what we showed the British. You know what I mean? Like we're still doing that. I think that's great. And I love, like, there's a lot of great things about it. I'll wear red, white, and blue. I'm happy to do those things. That's all good stuff. I do get questions about why do we not, in the church here especially, why do we not celebrate that more? Why do we not spend more time on that? Why isn't today red, white, and blue across the stage? Why aren't we singing more patriotic songs and anthems and lighting off fireworks in here? And I think it's pretty simple. First of all, I think I cannot, and maybe I'm wrong about this, you tell me, but I cannot imagine Jesus and his early followers getting together to celebrate Rome. I just can't imagine that ever happening. I don't know about you. I can't imagine them being like, guys, you know what we should do? Let's get together and we're going to have a big Rome celebration. I don't see it happening. And actually, Rome was a fairly free country, very similar to ours, in allowing them to at least do some of their representation until later when they started getting persecuted. They could have done some of that. They might have actually been good for them in many ways to have propagated Rome and made them look good. I can't imagine Jesus have done that. I also think there's a lot of places for you to go celebrate America. I don't think there's as many places that you can come together with people to talk about the kingdom of heaven. There's a lot less places for that. I'm not saying there's none. I think you could go to a Panera Bread and have that conversation right now. I just don't think we do. This is a design space for one purpose only. This is why we don't celebrate it, spend a lot of time on Mother's Day, Father's Day, a lot of different things like that. We just don't, because I think this is the time set apart for just this one conversation. And we don't have enough time for this one conversation as it is. I don't know if you feel that way or not. I don't feel like in our lives we have enough time for this conversation. But most importantly, the thing is, we don't, as believers, as people who follow Jesus, we don't solely live by a Bill of Rights, by a Constitution, by a Declaration of Independence. That's not our highest source of truth. It is a fine source of living in America and being a citizen. But as we just read, we are citizens of a different city, of a different place. And that is not our ultimate truth, because I believe that we're supposed to follow the way of Jesus above all other things. That's our ultimate source of truth. That's the highest source of what we're supposed to be subscribing to. Now, I believe that you can at times find overlap between those two things, and that's great. The thing I'm most grateful for is that we live in a country where we can, when we go off course of those things, we have the freedom to say, we need to get back on track. We have the freedom to say, hey, we're not where we should be as a nation. I appreciate that more than anything else. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to, I don't know about you, I don't believe that I'm going to die and be judged on how well I lived out the Declaration of Independence. I will be judged on how well I lived in the way of Jesus and bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth. Does that make sense? And you can be mad, that's fine. You can send me emails later. I'm just saying that's why we don't do those things. This is a different space for this. And here's why it matters. Because Cain is in charge of a city. He has made himself a king, a disordered king at that. And you know what? If it was up to him, if there was nobody looking at some other way of living, then that would be the whole story. But because we have this truth that is greater than a nation, We have a truth that's greater than just a founding set of principles. We have a truth greater than one person building walls, making a name for himself, and disordering love. We have a truth that is a God who breaks down those walls, comes to earth, and comes to us, to where we are right now. And he is not about making a name for himself, but in fact, he puts his name on us and his image in us. And then he, in his own love and his own grace for us, reorders our loves for us. We put our loves back in order. Because he does that for us, then we do have a different compass to live by. We have a different set of truths that we live by, and things can be righted. And that's the next thing we see, is that there is hope that things can be righted. This lineage doesn't just go one way, but there's two sides to the lineage. There's two sides to how this goes. C.S. Lewis said it this way about nations. He said, the apostles themselves who set on foot the conversion of the Roman Empire, the men who built up the Middle Ages, the English evangelicals who abolished the slave trade, they all left their mark on earth precisely because their minds were occupied not with earth, but with heaven. It is since Christians have largely ceased to think of the other world that they have become so ineffective in this. Like, we've forgotten about heaven. We only worry about this world. But he says this, and this is a great line that you know. Aim at heaven, and you'll get earth thrown in. All those good things that you love, they'll get thrown in. But aim at earth, and you get neither one. You don't get the kingdom of heaven or even this earth. For us, I think this is why it's so important for us, is to see it this way, because in verse 23, things start to change a little bit. We see that there's kind of a hope that's brought into this. Notice it says, Lamech said to his wives, to Ada and Zillah, listen to me. And he's going to start to preach almost what's going to happen in this country. This is how this country is going to live. He says to them, which he sings a song here, by the way. This is actually him singing a song. If you look in your Bible, what he's about to say is in song form, which is interesting to me. He says it this way. He says, I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. Now, this is a poem. This is him singing a song, which means something's important. If I've learned anything from watching, Hamilton, is when somebody sings, it's important. Like, you need to pay attention, right? This is what High School Musical taught every one of us. When somebody's about to sing, you know it's important. Pay attention. And he starts to sing. Now, this is not the first poem or song in the New Testament or in the Old Testament. Remember, we've already seen all of Genesis 1 is a poem. It's a poem of creation. And Genesis 2 is also a poem. Remember, in Genesis 2, the second poem we see so the first poem is God creating all there is, putting order to the world. The second poem is Adam when he first sees Eve. And he says, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. He sings over her. Those first 2 poems are about creating. This poem is only about death. The third poem is about death. He says, I've killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. This one is fully about death. And he says in that second verse, this is why it's important to keep our moral compass here. Because in the second verse, notice what he says. He says, if Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. Where does that come from? Remember in verse 15 it said that Cain would be avenged 7 times if anybody harmed him. Remember that? But Lamech himself, he says, well, me, I get 77 times. Now, this is why I'm glad that we have a different king that we can look to, because we would fall into this pattern as a nation, as a people. But remember, there's later a Savior who comes, Jesus. And this verse shows up. In Matthew chapter 18, remember there's this moment, this 77 times. Remember, Peter comes to Jesus and he asks, Lord, how many times should I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? This is Peter. And Peter's a good Bible scholar. He's a smart kid. He grew up a Jewish scholar. He would have gone to school like everybody else. He comes in and he says, how many times should I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? And that's a pretty good answer. Like, he's like, 7's good, right? That's a lot. And Jesus answers, because Jesus is a better Bible scholar, says, I tell you not 7 times, but what? 77 times. Where does he get that? Why does Jesus say that? Because there's a kingdom that Cain is building here, and it's a kingdom of violence and vengeance. But Jesus comes along and says, no, 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 my kingdom is different than that. Do not get stuck in the things of this world. You're living in a kingdom that is of this earth, but my kingdom is not of this world. And my kingdom is a kingdom not of vengeance, but it's a kingdom of forgiveness. Over and over and over again, 77 times. It's two different kingdoms, and Jesus is showing us that his kingdom is better and different. They're not the same. And so from that point, we see things shift in this narrative. Verse 25, we see a new beginning start. It says, Adam again made love to his wife, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, saying, God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him. Seth also would have a son, but we'll get to that in a second. Seth, notice what it means here. Cain means to acquire or to take, but Seth means to give. You could actually say that God Cain to Eve, like she acquired him, but you could also say that God Seth, because his name means to give. He gave Seth to her. He is a blessing. He is not the curse. He is a form of the blessing that will be extended. And from this point, there will be a separation of the curse and living in one way and this blessing that will live on through Seth. And Seth then has a son, and he names him Enosh. Enosh means humanity, all of humanity. He now has all of humanity under his new line of blessing. And notice this last line. It says, and at that time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. Remember, Cain was silent. Lamech wanted his name in the place of God. But Seth wants to call on the name of God. It's very different. This moment, by the way, where it says that they begin to call on the name of God, is the first time this ever happens. One scholar wrote it this way. He said, before, to be sure, Yahweh has intervened in the course of human history at this point in Genesis, but properly speaking, until Seth, no one had called on the name of God. That is, until the end of Genesis 4. This is what that means. There was no prayer. Remember, Seth was silent. Cain was silent. And Seth is now reaching out and saying, let's call on the name of the Lord. It's been 7 generations, and no one has called on the name of the Lord. But here we are. He calls on the name of the Lord. He says, with the advent of Seth, however, something has changed in the relationship. The name of God can now be called upon to help and to honor. Suddenly there is prayer. People are actually praying. They are actually calling out to the name of God. Now, this is where we're at. So you have the line of Cain, you have the line of Seth. They're two different lines. Cain builds a city, and he names it after his son. But we see Seth, who is appointed in place of Abel. Cain is making a name for himself, but Seth is the offspring who God has given. Lamech is living in polygamy. He wants vengeance 77-fold. But Enosh is the one who brings people to say that they will call on the name of the Lord. And what's interesting is Cain's line will show us what we get to when we get to the flood. Cain's line will be the one that takes us down the evil path that will take us to the flood. But guess who Noah comes through? Noah, the righteous one, comes through Seth's line. And from Noah, it goes to Abraham all the way up to Jesus. Seth's line continues on and on all the way through. In fact, Seth's line is so important that it shows up in Luke chapter 3 after Jesus is born. Notice this when it says, now Jesus himself was about 30 years old when he began his ministry. He was the son, so it was thought, of Joseph, the son of Heli. But then all the way at the bottom, if you skip through a bunch of verses and a bunch of names, it says this at the very end of that line. The son of Enosh, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God. Seth is even in the line of Jesus. This is how important it is that he is part of this. See, there's now fully 2 cities. As St. Augustine again would write about this, he says 2 cities now have been formed by 2 different loves. The earthly by the love of self, even to the contempt of God, speaking of Cain. And then the heavenly by the love of God, even to the contempt of self. And that's kind of the question we have to ask ourselves, is the contempt of self. Are we willing to reckon with the self in this whole thing? For me, this is like one of those things where we have to look at this through the lens of legacy. I'm not talking about this just as a parent, but I do think that's important, but other ways too. The legacy we leave on this earth, what does that look like? Because it does seem to matter here that there are two lines, and there's one that you're going to choose from. There's one that's going to be good and one that's going to be evil. And I don't know what you walked into. Ever had that moment? Do you ever have that moment where you realized like your family was messed up? You didn't know it. You thought your family was normal. And there's that one day where you're like, wait, we're messed up? We have problems? Remember that day? Anybody have that day? I remember my grandpa. I looked up to my grandfather so much. My grandfather, Gerald, Grandpa Gerald was a great guy, and he was just beloved in this little town in Ohio, and he was just a great fella. I remember we went to one of his favorite places was the Chinese buffet. We go to this Chinese buffet. We're sitting at the Chinese buffet. We're hanging out with Grandpa. He's just telling stories. He could tell stories for hours, and I was riveted the entire time. I loved it. And we're sitting there just talking. And as I'm talking with Grandpa Gerald, my brother and I are there. We're having a great time with him. And then all of a sudden, another Grandpa Gerald just walked in. Like a man who looked exactly like my Grandpa Gerald walked in to the Chinese buffet. And then he went and sat down at a booth that was not with us and sat by himself eating. And it creeped me out. It's like, that guy looks just like your grandpa. What happened? So we finish at the buffet, and it was great because they had those little, remember, at a Chinese buffet, they had the proper ice cream at the end where you're like, I don't think this is Chinese at all, but it's great. So I had soft serve. I walked out of the Chinese buffet, and we walked right past this man. I looked down at the table and looked at this man who looked just like my Grandpa Gerald. And we walked right past him as we walked out. And afterwards, we got to a place where it was just me and my brother, and I leaned over to my brother. I was like, hey, who is that? Who is the other Grandpa Gerald in there? And he goes, oh, that's your Uncle Harold. I was like, that can't be true. For real. What I found out that day is that my grandpa, Geraldine, he had a brother named Harold Gene. That's a true story. Geraldine Stamper and Harold Gene Stamper. We are a proud tradition. And my Grandpa Gerald and my Uncle Harold had gotten in a fight at one point and had never talked to each other again. And we walked out of there, and I realized there's a whole guy I didn't even know about and a whole lineage I wasn't even familiar with. To this day, I never talked to Harold Gene. He passed away. I never knew him. My family never talked to him. And they lived in a small town like near each other, even worked in the same company for many years, and did not talk to one another. And I remember being like, oh boy, that's weird. The whole lineage I didn't know about. Now, that, to me, it was a day where I was like, wait, our family's messed up? I didn't know. I thought we were doing pretty good. Maybe, I don't know what inheritance you've gotten as a lineage. I don't know what you've taken in, what brokenness you've gotten, or good things. I don't know what lineage you've left out or you've taken part in. I also don't know which one you're leaving behind, if I'm being honest. Which one you're going to leave after this. Because this isn't about countries. It isn't about nations. It's not about churches and how they act. This is about us. Nations and countries and churches are made up of families and individuals and people who choose what kind of legacy they're going to leave and the kind of people they're going to be. Here, Lamech decided to leave one kind, and then Seth is leaving another. They're very different backgrounds. And it seems to matter, just by the way. It seems to matter to what happens. I mean, it seems that God seems to care about this, but I will also say your family tradition and the things, the legacies that you have, the things that you leave behind, whatever that looks like, it matters to God. It seems to be an important thing. And some of it you can overcome just by good works or trying harder, but some of them take intentional, deep work to make those patterns not repeat themselves as you go forward. Remember, like God, he even speaks in the next scroll over, when after Genesis is over, he says this in Exodus. Remember in Exodus 34, he introduced himself. He says, it says, the Lord is compassionate and gracious. God, he's slow to anger and abounding in love and faithfulness. But notice this next line. Maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. We like the first part. That's better than this part. He doesn't leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of their parents to the third and fourth generation. Like those things stay with you. As Jesus' own brother, James, once wrote in his book, he said that there will be no one that doesn't understand, there will be no mercy without those who have been merciful. Mercy triumphs over that judgment, and that's good news. But there's going to be a judgment to generations and people that are going to understand that. As Pete Scazzaro once wrote, he writes Emotionally Healthy Leadership. This is the way he says it. Jesus may be in your heart, but grandpa's in your bones. Like you're still dealing with those things. They're still going to be there. You're still going to live in that brokenness. And the question is, what are you going to do about that? Are you going to change the legacy? Because the beautiful thing about the Bible is that many people do. Many people do change their legacy. Look at Joseph, who grew up in a family where they were all fighting one another for what they could get. Instead, Joseph leaves that life against his own volition. But by the end of his time, he learns not about fighting with each other, but about forgiveness to his brothers. His legacy is totally different. I mean, think about Rahab. She shows up in Jesus' own lineage in Matthew. She starts out a prostitute in the story and ends up the mother of many in Israel. I mean, she becomes a hero to the people of Israel. She changes everything. Jonathan, David's best friend, he comes into a line of being a lineage of a king. He will be the next prince. And yet he, instead of being royalty, lives his life running to help David and save David and being a best friend to somebody instead of chasing after the throne. There's a possibility of changing those things. It doesn't have to be the way it is. That's what's beautiful about the story. In 1855, Alfred Nobel woke up. You may know this story, but in 1855, Alfred Nobel woke up to his own obituary in the newspaper. Alfred Nobel was known as what it said in his obituary as he read it. It said that he was a merchant of terror. That's what it said. He was a merchant of terror because Alfred Nobel ran a company that created bombs. They were the first ones to create dynamite, in fact. And there was in his obituary, which actually his brother had died. His name was Ludwig or Ludwig, I assume. Ludwig had died. Ludwig had died instead. And in his obituary, it was the wrong person they had put in the obituary. But in that obituary, he read it and saw that what people thought about him was that he was a merchant of terror. That he had murdered more people with his dynamite than any other invention in the history of mankind. In 1855, he saw his own obituary written, and what he decided to do was from that point forward, he was going to create a prize for those who, instead of hurting humanity, bettered humanity. What do you know Alfred Nobel for today? The Nobel Prize. Not for his dynamite, not for him murdering people, but for his contribution to those who are furthering the betterment of humanity. He even wrote of himself that he struggled with this internally, with changing who he was. He said, I am a misanthrope, meaning like I'm always a curmudgeon. I'm always kind of cranky. I'm always negative. But he said, yet I'm utterly benevolent. Like he's wrestled with that in his own soul about this because he changed his legacy and thought it could be something different. For many of us, this is a hard thing for us because we have to really reckon with what do we want to leave behind? Who do we want to be? Not just through the people below us, because I do want my kids to be taller than me. I do want that to happen. I am worried about their height on a daily basis. But what I'm more concerned about is if they are following Jesus. If they are those that will see that pattern through my life and will live that pattern through theirs. If what they're bringing in their line will be a line that they will be proud to be able to pass on. I'm not going to get it perfect. None of us will. But are we fixing those things that we can as we move forward, or are we letting evil continue to mature and manipulate itself and multiply itself, or are we going to let the good do the same thing through our lives? This is why C.S. Lewis says that there's no neutral ground in the universe. Every square inch, every split second is claimed by God and counterclaimed by Satan. So as we close, I would love to just stand where you are, and we're going to kind of sing and just kind of in hope of these things. But I also just want to put this prayer in front of you. This is a prayer of St. Augustine, and this is what he would say. This was a simple prayer that he wrote many times, and he said, God, set love in order for me. He would say, set love in order for me. Would you help me prioritize the things I love? Would you help me put them in the right places so that I would be the kind of person you want me to be? Would you set love in order in me? Not just for me, but in me. Help me to live those priorities the way you would have me live them. Would you stand together as we pray?